This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
The head of the Achievement School District talks charter schools and school takeovers tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by Chris Barbick, superintendent of the Achievement School District. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Along with Bill Dries, senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. It's been, we were talking maybe a year and a half since you've been here. I think most people watch the show are familiar with the ASD, but let's do a quick thing. What is the Achievement School District, the ASD? How long it's been around? Let's remind everyone of its role.
Sure. So the Achievement School District is a statewide school district. It was created out of Tennessee's Race to the Top application back in 2010. And our focus is to work in the schools that are in the bottom 5% in the state. So there's about 85 schools that make up that bottom 5%. We currently have 23 schools statewide, 22 here in Memphis and 1 in Nashville. And we're in the process of going through a matching process where we'll potentially add another 6 to 8 schools next year.
So you're going in, this is your third year, I think, is that correct?
Third year, yeah. So our oldest schools finished their second year last year. Okay. And of the 17 schools we had last year, 6 were in their second year. So the vast majority of our schools, our oldest are in year 3.
Right.
Most of them are in their first or second year.
And it's a combination of, in some cases, you all take over direct control. Sometimes you bring in a charter operator, different charter operators. That gets confusing in Memphis because there's so many different charter schools here coming in under the auspices of the Shelby County schools or under a kind of takeover situation. And then there's also the complication, there's the I-Zone district that the Shelby County Schools runs, which is a kind of parallel organization to yours, right? I mean, they come in and try to hit those bottom schools. But this is a different, people who've followed schools, Memphis, wherever, for a long time, there have been plans, state takeover plans. This one's different, right? You all have a lot more autonomy and more of a mission of sort of how to go in, whether or not it's working, which we'll get to. But it's a different, some people are kind of maybe numb to the fact that, well, state takeover schools. This is a little different though, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's really only probably two or three other states in the country that have anything close to what we're doing here in Tennessee. Louisiana's Recovery School District, which was created about a year before Hurricane Katrina. And actually, a lot of the legislation that created the Achievement School District was modeled after what was happening in Louisiana. Michigan has one. Virginia tried to do it. It was declared unconstitutional. So there's other states that are toying with this idea. But you're right. I think, for folks that live in Memphis, lots changed in the last 2 years around public schools, and we're a part of that landscape.
Right. And of course, we'll get to the fact that now Nashville's going to have a bunch of schools. I mean, it's not just a Memphis problem. It's a statewide problem. Yep. It started, folks in Memphis had the vast majority of the schools, right. But now a whole bunch of, we'll get to that too. Let me ask you a simple question. For the schools you've taken over, is it working? Is our achievement, are students learning more? Is the whole program working?
Well, I think, if you look at the schools that just finished their second year last year, we had 6 of them. We had 3 charter schools and 3 schools that were running. In our 3 charters, all 3 were level 5 growth. They averaged double-digit gains. They made 11-point gains on their school success rate. Some of them had a rough first year, but responded, learned, and that's the bet we're making. Is charter organizations are quick, nimble organizations that can respond quickly and make changes, and we saw that. In the direct run schools, we saw gains in 2 out of the 3. If you look across the ASD, our students outperformed the state in math and reading last year. Now, all that to say, not every school's making progress as quickly as we like, but I think it's still very early to draw any major conclusions about what we're doing. We're 2 years old. The schools that we're working in did not get in the bottom 5% in 2 years. I mean, this is a problem that's been happening over the course of decades. So I think we're seeing some bright spots. We're seeing schools that are improving quickly, but we're also seeing schools that need to get better faster.
Right. Bill.
Chris, the round of schools that you've got on the short list for the third school year, the meetings that we've seen, the opposition to this has been probably better organized than it was in the first 2 years, much more vocal. what do you say about the resistance that we've seen in this third round of schools here in Memphis?
Yeah, we were talking a little bit about that earlier. I think that if you look at the quality of the meetings, I think that honestly, they haven't been that much different than meetings we've had in the past. We had a meeting at Southside 2 years ago where everybody in the audience got up and walked out in the middle of the meeting. I think the difference has been the amount of attention that's being put on the community meetings. I mean, for the first couple of years, there was a merger and a demerger, and I think that sucked up a lot of the attention around what was happening in public education. That's done. And so I think that's been different. I think that the meeting at Raleigh, Egypt was a pretty boisterous meeting. I understand that. I think that anytime that we're saying this is happening and it's not a matching process, but really a decision's already been made, I can see how communities would react the way they did. And then you have some elected leaders there, and Representative Parkinson and school board member who I think have influenced the conversation too. But so I think overall, part of what you're saying is right. I mean, I think the teachers in particular have been a little bit more organized. And if you look at the community meetings, I mean, the vast majority of the folks in those meetings are teachers in the schools that are being impacted. And I understand how this could create some disruption for them. We've told all of them that they're guaranteed an interview with the charter organization that's going to be involved in the school. And we want to give everybody a fair shake to have an opportunity to stay at the school if that's what they want to do.
Mm-hmm. But to repeat, they're guaranteed an interview, but when you guys take over a school, that's all they're guaranteed.
Well, sure. I mean, it's a different system. So there's this whole conversation about having to reapply for a job, and it's not even really that. I mean, if a teacher went to go teach at Tipton County or went from Shelby County to Germantown, I mean, that's a different employer, and so you've got to go through an application process. And same thing here. I mean, if a charter organization, which is its own nonprofit, is now running the school, that's a different employer, and folks that want to stay at the school will need to apply for a position with that organization.
Right. Mm-hmm. In terms of the phase-in model that you've used over the last 2 years, the results for that have been a little bit better than just coming in and taking on the whole school in this. But there's also the question about what happens for those students in the other grades, and Shelby County Schools has, I think in the last go-around, adopted a policy that they would close the schools and transfer the children to other schools that might be nearby. Mm-hmm. Is that going to be a problem going forward? Because that is something we're hearing from the parents is, okay, if my child's not in that first grade in the phase-in, they'll be going to a different school, and parents are uneasy about that.
Sure. Well, the way the charters grow, I mean, they spell that in their application. We don't want to be an organization that says you have to grow a certain way. What we want organizations to do is to do this with quality. And if an organization, a charter says, hey, look, we feel better about growing a grade at a time so we can get the school culture right, we can train staff, we want to give them the flexibility to be able to do that. And you're right. I mean, if you look at our phase-in schools last year, they averaged 22-point gains in reading and 16-point gains in math. So we saw some really strong results in those schools. What Shelby County chooses to do with the grades that we don't serve yet is, we respect their decision. I think it does cause disruption for families. I think they've chosen and think that it's better for their staff and to not be co-located in the school because there are a lot of logistics that need to get worked out around that. And all we can say is that that's their decision. We respect their decision. They've been a good partner in this work. And hopefully as we move forward, we can make those disruptions as small and minimize them as much as possible for the families.
In terms of what we've seen with Innovation Schools and Achievement School District schools, are you guys learning from each other in terms of this? Because so much of the focus has been on the competition between the two, and the competition has been pretty healthy.
Yeah.
But what are you learning from each other?
Well, I think it's important to remember that the Innovation Zone was created through state policy. So this is something that we wanted to see in the schools when the state got its waiver 2 years ago from the No Child Left Behind. we created in policy the opportunity for districts to create innovation zones. So the fact that Shelby County's, utilized that policy and has created an iZone and has put resources in it and it's doing as well as it has, I mean, we see that as a positive. As far as the competition, I think it has been healthy. I mean, we've, last year, there were 3 or 4 times during the course of the school year where we got all the principals of the schools together, both iZone schools and ASD charters and direct runs, to talk about what's been working, what's not working. We just had a group of staff members from one of our charters go over to Cherokee Elementary just this past week and do a half day of observations, meeting with the principal. We've had folks come out to our schools. We've visited Ford Road. So I think there's a lot of back and forth happening. It's pretty informal, but I think my experience has been that this is most effective when it's a principal to principal connection. It's not this top down thing that we're forcing people to do, that those relationships grow organically, and that folks are learning from each other. And I think, it's happening to the benefit of kids.
What about, people sometimes call Memphis Teacher Town now, because there have been so many Teach for America teachers coming in. There are iZone, all these different charter schools that are separate from your group. I mean, is the pool of teachers you pull from kind of different than it was 10 years ago? I mean, is it a more competitive environment? Do teachers move around from year to year because they say, hey, they're doing something interesting over at Freedom Prep and they're doing something interesting in the ASD? Or is that maybe an exaggeration?
I think it's definitely gotten more competitive. I think the Teacher Town effort was really focused on 3 things. How do we keep the great educators that are here in the classroom? How do we develop local talent? And how do we continue attracting folks from around the country to come to Memphis? And if you're a teacher in Memphis today versus a teacher in Memphis 4 or 5 years ago, I mean, think about the choices you have now. You've got 7 school districts that you can go and work with. You've got another 10 to 15 to 20 charter organizations. I mean, you've got close to 25, 30 employers now versus 4 or 5 years ago, there were 2. There were 2 employers. And so I think, that creates competition amongst us as employers to create the value proposition so that you as a teacher want to come work with us. And if you're a teacher, you can now shop around and find a place that's going to be a good fit.
And you also have tremendous flexibility in terms of, or I don't know if it's tremendous, but you have a lot of flexibility in terms of salaries and a lot of variation. So back in the day, the Shelby County school system, the suburban schools were on X scale, and then the Memphis City schools were on Y scale. Now with charter schools, iZone, you can get out there and compete for people. And that's also a statewide thing, I mean, in terms of changing the way that collective bargaining works. And some would say very much weakening the union, some would say reining in the union, however you want to characterize that. The reality is you have more flexibility in terms of what you can pay people.
There is, and the state's pushing, what they call differentiated compensation, not just here in Memphis, but across the state, so that teachers, for example, if you're teaching in a high need area like math or science, especially at the high school level, or special ed, in the old days, that person made exactly the same amount as the PE teacher. And nothing to take away from the PE teacher, but if you're teaching in a very specialized area where we're having a tough time finding teachers, why not be able to offer folks signing bonuses or retention bonuses? I mean, that happens every day in lots of other sectors across the city. And so I think giving our schools, giving our systems the flexibility to do those sorts of things to attract people to those fields. Special education is another one. I think it's good common sense. And if teachers are benefiting as a result of that, I think it's a good thing.
One more thing on teachers, I'll go back to Bill, but when we talk about this process of you taking over a school, the teachers who are there interview, what percentage, and I feel like I've asked you this question before, but roughly what percentage of teachers in a school you take over return to that school once you've taken it over?
Yeah, I mean, it varies from school to school. I think the first thing we look at is how many of them actually applied, because you can't offer a job to someone that doesn't apply for it. So I think we're seeing, again, that number ranges from 20 to 50% of the teachers even applying for a position.
So often less than half of the teachers who are there even want to work with you or choose to or whatever. Okay.
Sure. We're seeing those numbers go up as people get more used to what's happening and get a little bit more of a comfort level with the organizations that are here.
And I guess also the fact that the whole way in which teachers can and move and seniority is less important. They're not, in the old days they were, I don't know, guaranteed, but had more of a guarantee of a job somewhere else if they didn't get a job with you. Now they've got to apply to other schools that aren't ASD schools, right? I mean, they're not as guaranteed as they were a position.
Yeah, that's
Is that
right.
fair?
Yeah, I mean, you're a little bit more of a free agent these days.
Yeah,
I mean, if,
right.
if you don't apply for a position with us, or you do and you're not hired, the district's not guaranteed to place that teacher.
Right,
So,
right. Okay, and that's a sea change that gets mixed up in all this. I mean, sometimes people blame consolidation on that. Well, no, that was actually a
state
result
law.
of the state law. I mean, so much has happened. I mean, we have talked, so much about schools. It's hard to break apart which was driving which, change. But anyway, Bill.
Can I just say one
Yeah,
thing?
yeah,
I think,
please, sure.
So, we talk about competition. I think it cuts both ways. I mean, I think if you're a teacher, there's more choices, which creates competition amongst employers. But the flip side is it's a more competitive environment for teachers too, because folks aren't guaranteed a job. You're not force placed. The most effective teachers are going to rise to the top, and those are going to be the ones that are most sought after.
Yeah, yeah.
Chris, what are the discussions like at this point about continuing the funding that both your school district and the iZone Innovation Zone schools have at their assistance here in all of this? Because that funding has allowed things to happen in both sets of schools that really are crucial to the success of each of them.
Right. Well, the funding streams that have funded most of this work, both the work that we're doing in the ASD in terms of the support staff that we have that supports our schools, and the work in the iZone is through federal money. A lot of our funding initially is through Race to the Top. We were actually able to extend the Race to the Top grant for an additional year and stretch those dollars out. So we basically got $22 million over a 5-year period to set up our school district. Our schools still get the same, local, state dollars, and we just push those down to the schools. The school improvement grant dollars, which is another federal program, that's what's funding a lot of the iZone work. That money depends each year on how Congress appropriates those funds. There should be some additional school improvement grant dollars over the next year to fund some of our work and some of the iZone work. And then our long-term sustainability plan is we'll start to charge, probably a 2 to 3% fee to our schools. We'll just take that off the per pupil allocation to fund, a pretty small back office. If you look, the state comptroller just came out with a report about 2 or 3 weeks ago that said most districts are spending in the range of about 5% on what you'd call administrative overhead. We're looking at charging our charters and direct runs 2.5% to 3%, so it would be less than what the state average is, which we think is pretty fair. And we're not looking to build a big, robust central office. I mean, our goal is to push as much of the resources and decision-making authority down to the schools, but we are still the district for these schools, and there are certain, things that we have to be responsible for.
Roughly how many people in the back office?
So for the five schools that we are running directly, we've got a team of about 15 people that provides direct support to those schools.
In the school?
They're set up in a portable building in Fraser, and
Okay.
they provide direct support
Right.
to those Fraser schools, and they're doing everything from coaching teachers to doing financial support. And then we've got another 15 people that are providing support to the entire 23 schools in our, actually probably closer to 25 people in our LEA district office that are providing support to all the
Right.
folks across the 23
And are they
schools.
based back in Nashville? That last group you
Most of the
talked-
folks are here. I
They
mean,
are,
we've
okay.
really relocated. I mean, we've got most of our
Right.
teams here in Memphis, 'cause that's where most of the schools are. We've got 4 or 5 people that are in Nashville office.
Okay.
And I think we're about to turn to Nashville, but before we get to there, is there anything that you have seen in the meetings here with the schools for the third school year that has caused you to reconsider those choices at this point?
Well, we had the situation with KIPP and Freedom Prep where they made the decision to kind of hit pause and really focus on the schools that they have. And we're always going to respect those decisions. I mean, we've said from the very beginning this is about quality over scale, and we're never going to force a charter partner to take on a school if they feel like they're not in a position for whatever reason to do it well. I think for the schools that we're looking at right now, I mean, this is a matching process. We'll make final decisions December 12th. There may be some things that change over the course of the next several weeks. I mean, I've said this before, I don't know if it was on this show, but just in general, we can't, as a community, have it both ways, right? If we're going to do a real, authentic community engagement process, it's going to be messy. I mean, it's not going to be this nice, neat, tidy bow where everything plays out exactly the way we want. We can do that, but if we're going to do that, then that looks more like these are the schools, this is the match, period, we're done. And I think it's important to remind people that we actually have the authority to do that. I mean, we're choosing not to take all 80 schools at once. We're choosing to work with Shelby County Schools. We're choosing to have community meetings and to have this be a very open and transparent process. And we don't have to do any of those things. And I don't say that to kind of puff my chest out and beat it, but I think we are trying to do this the right way. And I think what folks have to understand is if we're going to do this on a very public stage, that everything's not going to work out exactly the way we may think it is 3 weeks ago. And so we're not anticipating a lot of changes between now and December 12th, but there could be some between now and then.
You talk about South. You talked earlier about when your first meetings at Southside and the whole audience or a big bunch of the audience walked out. How are their test scores over the time you've been?
So
Because it worked in Southside despite that protest.
We took them off the list.
Right.
I mean, we took them off the list last year because they made a pretty compelling case what their data was. But if you look, the list got rerun.
Yeah.
They're back on it.
Yeah.
So I think in those cases, if and when we do end up going back to that school community, being able to say, look, we came here, you asked for more time, we gave you more time.
Right.
You're still in the bottom 5%. At some point,
Yeah.
we got to do something.
We talked about Nashville, and it's an interesting thing because you are a statewide effort. Of the 80 original schools, I can't remember, 60 or 70 were tagged as underperforming schools statewide, were Memphis. But math is math. And so as Memphis brings up its scores, other schools in other parts of the state are in that bottom 5%. Nashville now has how many schools in this year?
They grew from 6 to 15.
And how has Nashville? So there's a little gloating. There's a little gloating in Memphis because in Memphis, it's always Memphis is has all the failing schools. Nashville is perfect and has a lot of country music. They've got 15 failing schools. And what's your approach more seriously with those schools?
Well, I think before we talk, I think what you said is really important. I mean, if you look at what happened in just a 2 years' time, there's 4,500 fewer students in Memphis attending a priority school today than there was 2 years ago. I mean, that's bigger than most of the municipal districts. I mean, if we think about that. So I mean, that's not a small number. And I think it's really a tribute to just the sense of urgency and the collective effort of a lot of folks here. So that's no small matter. And I think it's important to remind viewers that the threshold to be in the bottom 5% went up. So that bottom 5% cutoff 2 years ago to now increased 8 points. So it was, the whole floor went up. So I think it's important for everyone to understand that context. Having said that, I think in Nashville, there hasn't been that sense of urgency. I think, for a lot of folks there, they kind of looked west and said, well, we're doing better than those guys. And it's harder to say that today than it was 2 years ago. And so I suspect that over the course of the next 24 months that our emphasis as a system, as a team, we'll start spending a lot more time focusing on Nashville schools. We're looking at adding 1 to 2 schools there next year. I think the year after that, the number will increase.
And there's been a lot more charter resistance in Nashville too, not just through your ASD, but just generally resistance to charter schools. I mean, some would say they're behind Memphis in terms of this idea of school reform and so on. Just a couple minutes left, Bill.
Are there different charter regulations for Nashville than there are for Memphis? Are there conditions at the district level that are different, or are they the same?
Are you talking about with MNPS?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Not that I'm aware of. I don't think there are. I mean, they can authorize charters just like Shelby County can. I think it's more in kind of mindset and willingness to work collaboratively that we're just seeing that happening a lot more here than there. I think, the superintendent there has tried to change the tone over the last 6 to 8 months, and I think that's helped a bit. But you're not seeing the same kind of collective effort. Let's provide parents options. That's a good thing, sort of spirit in Nashville that you do see here in Shelby County.
And their director of schools, Jesse Register, is leaving.
Yes, he announced this past October that I think June is his last month.
Right. So a lot of change there as well.
Just a couple of quick questions over big subjects. Are your schools involved in the Common Core? I mean, or are they just involved in getting off the bottom? But do they implement Common Core type standards as they turn
Well,
these
sure. I
schools
mean,
around, or attempt to
the
turn
standards are the
Okay.
same standards for all the schools.
Right.
So we see the standards as the what. How those standards get taught, that's the curriculum, and that's the freedom we give to the schools.
It generally, with Common Core and with everything we're talking about, is all data driven. Do you feel like there's too much of an emphasis on test scores, testing, and all that data driven stuff, and not enough on sort of maybe the more subjective gray area? I mean, teaching is a complicated thing. Kids come from different backgrounds. We're talking about problem schools. Is there too much emphasis on data and testing?
But I think that's a great question. I mean, and it's tough to answer in kind of a 30-second soundbite. I think that, what I would say is that student achievement data needs to be a data point. Should it be the end-all, be-all data point? Probably not. But I think you can't. So when we think about things like teacher evaluations, I mean, to not have student achievement data be part of how we evaluate a teacher's performance, to me, just doesn't make sense. It's not 100% of the evaluation. It's 30 to 35%, and there are other things that make up the remaining 70. When you're looking at school performance, how kids do on TBOS and TCAP, that is a data point. But there are other things like, do kids feel safe? What's the school culture? Are parents satisfied? So I think we have to look at all those things when we're talking about how a school's doing, and I think data is just part of that conversation.
And last one, some people may know that you had a heart attack 6 weeks ago. You're better. You're fine.
I'm feeling good. Yeah.
You're younger than me, so don't do this.
Well, it certainly wasn't part of the plan, but I am feeling better. I made my first trip back to Memphis this past Saturday, and it feels good to be back.
Good. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Bill. Thank you for joining us. See us next week.
Thank you.
Bye.